Who is the real Jane the Killer? For many, the story of Jane Arkensaw is considered the official version. However, many of you have told us that this is a transformation of the original creepypasta, that of Jane Richardson. Which one is better? You'll only know if you stick around until the end. 2002 was not a good year for Jane Richardson. A tragedy had marked her forever. She had lost her parents at the hands of Jeff the Killer. However, life went on. She took on the responsibility of caring for her younger sister Jessie, who was only 13 years old. Fortunately, her aunt Samantha became a great support for them, helping them financially. But Jane knew that she had to put all her willpower into protecting her sister and not relying on others' help. So she started working at an IHOP as a waitress, a job that barely allowed her to make ends meet. One afternoon, while drinking some juice and taking a 10-minute break at the restaurant, she came across an ad in the newspaper. The local blood bank was offering $150 to those who donated, provided they had exceptionally healthy blood. The idea of earning that money quickly filled her with hope. She could use it to pay the month's rent. Without hesitation, she noted down the address on her phone and resumed her work. Her co-worker Alexis, another waitress, quickly noticed the change in Jane's mood as she wore a big smile and filled customers' drinks to the brim. When Jane shared the ad's information, Alexis frowned in confusion. $150? That sounds too good to be true. It's already strange that they'd pay anything, but that much? Jane laughed and replied that it was clear they had made some changes, and that suited her just fine. The atmosphere at IHOP was quiet that night. As the hours passed, the restaurant became a refuge amidst the bustle of California. On the TV screen, the news was reporting on the continued search for Jeffrey Woods, known as Jeff the Killer, the one responsible for Jane's parents' murder. The police had been unable to capture him and had requested the collaboration of the FBI and CIA. Jane felt a shiver run down her spine when she heard his name. She didn't just want him captured, she wanted that bastard erased from the face of the earth forever. Among the few customers that night, one man caught the young woman's attention. He appeared to be in his 40s, with dark hair, dressed in an elegant black suit and tie. He wore sunglasses and had a blue earpiece hanging from his left ear. His behavior seemed almost calculated, watching the employees with an intensity that made Jane uneasy. As she approached to take his order, she felt his gaze bore into her, almost as if he were scanning her from the inside. The man ordered a well-done T-bone steak with plain eggs. As she spoke to him about new dishes on the menu, he kept looking at her with great interest, making her feel very uncomfortable. While she headed to the kitchen to prepare the food, the man pressed a button on his earpiece and began speaking in a low voice. "We found the perfect woman." He was an FBI agent, Marcus East, who wouldn't stop until Jeff the Killer was captured. The man continued talking to his contact on the other side of the earpiece. "Gather the agents for next week." His plan was already in motion. Later, the agent said goodbye to Jane with a full stomach from a delicious dinner. When closing time arrived, the young woman said goodbye to Alexis and headed to the blood bank. She only went to check if there was more information on the door, but upon arriving, she was surprised to see it was open. Intrigued, she thought maybe they were open 24 hours. She approached the receptionist, who greeted her with a smile. Jane asked about the ad, and the woman guided her to the end of the hallway, pointing to the second door on the right. The wait in the room was brief. Afterwards, the doctor completed the blood draw and placed a bandage on her arm, wishing her a good night. While the receptionist was searching through some files on her computer, Jane complained about the pain in her arm, and the receptionist assured her it would improve in a day or two. With a kind gesture, she handed over the promised money. As Jane received the bills, she thought about the great relief that extra income would provide in paying the rent. Feeling happy, she headed back home. The next day, while working at the restaurant, she received a call. It was the blood bank. Her heart raced as she wondered what they might want and if they were going to ask for some of the money back. On the other end of the phone was Beth Williams, a doctor from the center, who asked if she could come back to make another blood donation. Before Jane could respond, the doctor mentioned that they were willing to pay her up to $10,000. Jane felt like the world had stopped around her. $10,000 for a simple blood donation? As she processed the information, she realized that amount could change everything for her and her sister. So even without understanding the sudden interest in her blood, she accepted. A week later, Jane returned to the center. While waiting, she encountered the same receptionist and doctor who had drawn her blood on the previous visit. The process went smoothly, and when it was over, Jane claimed the cash and placed it in her wallet. As she left the building and headed towards her car, two women approached her. One of them flashed her CIA badge and in a firm tone assured her that she hadn't done anything wrong but needed to come with them. Fearing they might want to take back the money from the blood bank or that she had been the victim of a major scam, Jane got into the agent's car, her mind racing with uncertainty. The ride to the CIA headquarters in Los Angeles was silent. Upon arrival, Jane noticed an FBI van parked outside. The situation only confused her more. Despite her attempts to get answers from the agents, all of her questions were met with, "That information is classified." Once inside, she was taken to an interrogation room. As she sat down, she found herself facing an agent who was watching her seriously. The man began by talking about her loss, referring to her parents, and then continued to talk about Jeffrey Woods. As the words left his lips, Jane understood less and less. These people believed that her blood type was necessary to stop Jeff. Her mind struggled to process everything that was happening. But what other option did she have? As she moved from one medical exam to another, her sense of distrust grew. While walking down the hallways, her gaze stopped on a room where there were gurneys covered with white sheets, hiding bodies that made her fear for her own life. The unease turned into panic, and her survival instincts kicked in, leading her to attack the guards. However, in her attempt to defend herself, she was knocked out and sedated by a doctor. Her world began to blur, and everything went black. When she woke up, she was lying in a chair. She couldn't see anyone, but she was being watched. In front of her was a large one-way mirror, like the kind in interrogation rooms. And on the other side, several doctors were observing her. She felt something on her forehead that seemed like a bandage, but it had electrodes and wires coming out of it. Her hands and feet were strapped to the chair. No matter how much she moved, she couldn't break free. A few seconds later, she heard an unfamiliar voice.
"Miss Richardson, I'm Dr. Beth Williams from the blood bank. I didn't want to bring you here this way, but some of these agents told me you had a very special blood type. And they were right. If you're wondering, I'm the one who sedated you. I'll be by your side to monitor your vital signs throughout this process."
Jane was still perplexed, unable to comprehend anything, only listening to the doctor's voice through a speaker. Then one of the agents who had driven her began to explain further. Her blood made her the perfect candidate for an experiment funded by the United States. Jane then looked at her arm and noticed an IV inserted, and that they were drawing blood from her. The agent continued, saying that the scientists would come in later with a serum. That serum contained secret components that would help her get revenge on the person who had killed her parents. A few minutes later, a doctor entered the room with the substance he referred to as liquid hate. He assured Jane that she had nothing to worry about and that she would be fine. They began the process, and while they took blood from one side, they introduced the substance into her body from the other. Despite the medical staff's reassurances that there was nothing to fear, a tear rolled down her cheek. All the voices around her, the doctors, the agents, the scientists, started to sound distant. On the other side of the glass, the doctors were monitoring her vital signs. Her heart was beating normally. Everything seemed fine. Jane watched as her blood was slowly drained, and she began to feel weak and very sleepy, noticing how she was fading away. The machine tracking her heartbeat displayed a flat line, and at that moment, Jane was clinically dead. The young woman felt the soft caress of a familiar hand on her face. It was her mother, Paula. She opened her eyes and was in that room with her mother and father, who stood beside her, dressed in his military uniform and medals, radiating a warm light. Despite the situation, Jane felt safe seeing her parents again. Paula hugged her tenderly and explained that after the blood extraction, she had crossed into an intermediate place, but they would stay with her until she returned to life. Meanwhile, they comforted her with their touches. Bruce, with his characteristic humor, made Jane laugh, recalling childhood moments that always brought a smile to her face. Oh, how much she missed them, how much she needed them in her life. Just remember one thing, my dear Janie, her mother said. If you ever need me or your dad, we will be here, pointing her finger to Jane's heart. And we'll see you again in your dreams, darling. We love you, her father added, smiling. Her mother pointed to the bag of liquid hate, which was nearly done inoculating her. I love you, Mom. I love you, Dad, Jane said, giving her parents a hug. They kissed her and then they disappeared. Jane began regaining consciousness, feeling her body responding again. The monitors around her indicated that her heart and brain were functioning normally. As her vision adjusted, she realized she was still in the same room. However, when she looked at her hands, she noticed her skin had taken on a pale, almost ghostly tone, and her hair, once platinum blonde, was now as black as coal. Shock and fear overwhelmed her. Desperate to free herself, she found the strength to remove the shackles and cables that had bound her. She stood up from the chair and with a violent attitude, glaring at the glass that separated the two rooms, she began screaming, enraged and out of control. The scientist informed the doctors that Jane would experience violent episodes due to the liquid hate now coursing through her veins. With unexpected strength and shouting profanities, Jane hurled a chair at the mirror. Why the hell do I look like a freaking corpse? I'm so pale! One of the scientists responded through the speaker. Hello, Miss Richardson. That's because your natural skin color is gone. Jane grabbed a chair again and threw it at the two-way mirror, shattering the glass. She grabbed the doctor's shirt by the collar and slammed him against the wall with incredible force. One of the scientists activated the alarm so that the security guards and medical staff could stop her. A guard pulled out a syringe, but Jane snatched the needle and stabbed the doctor between the eyes, injecting an air bubble into him. Two guards with tasers tried to stop her, but she grabbed their arms, causing them to electrocute each other. She then approached another agent and broke his wrist while blood splattered everywhere. Afterwards, she emptied the container of liquid hate, smashed it against the ground, and finally buried a piece of glass in the head of an agent, killing him. Jane's clothes were completely stained with blood. Surrounded by dead, mutilated, and incapacitated bodies, she looked at the group and, in a threatening tone, said, "Thank you for saving me. Now I know what I have to do. I must kill Jeffrey Woods and end his reign of terror once and for all. If he doesn't die, more lives will be lost. I'm much stronger now. I'm unstoppable, impossible to kill. Anyone who stands in my way will see that I'll be the last thing they look at. I will kill Jeff the Killer, and no one will stop me." A few minutes later, Jane's violent attitude subsided and she returned to acting normally. Relieved, the doctors began a series of medical exams, X-rays, MRIs, and other procedures. Jane was carefully examined and the results showed no abnormalities. An ophthalmologist approached her with a card of small letters and asked her to read what was on it. Jane did so without difficulty, surprising the doctor with her sharp vision. After the exams were completed, Jane asked if she could leave. The doctor nodded, giving her permission. She grabbed her blood-stained clothes, which had been provided to her in a hospital bag, and walked out of the building without caring about her nakedness. As she was heading home, she came across some clothes someone had hung out to dry. She decided to try on an outfit that consisted of black sweatpants, a tank top, and a hoodie, which fit her perfectly. They smelled sweet and gave her a sense of freshness, leaving behind her bag of blood-soaked clothes. She put on some socks and her sneakers. Finally, she called Jessie to let her know she was okay. Her sister had been anxiously waiting for her. When she arrived home, her girlfriend Mary was also waiting. Jessie immediately ran into her older sister's arms, giving her a big hug. Mary hugged her next, and the two shared a deep, loving kiss on the lips. "I knew you'd come back," Jessie said, tears of joy in her eyes. "Of course I did," Jane replied. Jeff now had some competition, as did many other criminals out there. Jane the killer. Is she Jane Richardson or Jane Arkensaw? According to her friends at TikTakers, Jane was originally created by the Lady Black Wolf with the story of Jane Richardson. However, this character became someone different in the version that most of you know, which we already have on the channel. Will you stick around to watch and give us your verdict in the comments on which one you like more?
Today we tell you the story of Jane Arkensaw, aka Jane the Killer, a girl next door to Jeff. Jane used to watch Jeff from the window from time to time. He was new in the neighborhood and she was curious about him. One day she was late for school and saw Randy and his gang threatening Jeff and his brother Lou. She knew perfectly that Randy was a bully who made everyone pay money or a recess snack in exchange for not getting beaten up. She looked back and saw how Randy stole Liu's bag and pushed Jeff to the ground. Then he stood up, and Jane said to herself, "Stay seated, don't be stupid." Then she saw how Jeff lunged at Randy. Then he grabbed Troy, who fell to the ground screaming in pain. Jane was surprised. It seemed that Jeff was having too much fun. The next thing that came was the sound of police car sirens, and Jane's father, who was a policeman, came out of his house and got into the car. Jane went with her parents to school, and they told her very clear that they didn't want her to talk to Jeff, so she didn't see him again until the end of the day. When she saw him leave class, she noticed as if Jeff was pretending to be happy so that people would not suspect the crime he had committed, but in reality he was showing a slightly sadistic smile. It was like the smile of a madman, Jane thought. The next day, Jane looked out the window and saw a police car in front of Jeff's house. She thought that they would take Jeff for what he had done, but she was wrong. Instead of him, they arrested Liu. Then she saw Jeff crying for what happened. From that moment, people started to spread many poisonous rumors about Liu. Days later, Jeff's next-door neighbor threw a birthday party, and Jane watched through the window as the kids were having fun, until Randy and his friends jumped over the fence. Randy lunged at Jeff and knocked him down. Then Troy and Jake pulled out some guns, and then Jane knew they were going to kill him. She decided to call the police. After hearing some shots, she looked again. She saw the flames of fire and heard screams, so she grabbed a fire extinguisher and headed towards the house. But when she got there, she saw Jeff sitting on the stairs burning with flames. He had singed skin, and Jane passed out. When she woke up, she was in the hospital and asked about Jeff. The nurse told her that she couldn't let her see him, even if she was his girlfriend, to which she replied with a trembling voice, "He's not my boyfriend." So she left the room, saw Jeff's parents, who thanked her for having tried to save their son. They told her that Jeff was wearing bandages, that they would be removed in a few days, and that when the time came, they would let her know. Then she recounted everything she saw when Jeff got into a fight with Randy's gang, and Jeff's parents said that if it was true, they would set Liu free in a few days. Days later, Jane's classmates started picking on her, because they thought she had a crush on Jeff. Liu appeared and told her that Jeff's bandages would be removed the next day. The next morning, Jane saw Jeff's parents' car parked and she was very happy. But when she saw Jeff get out of the car, her face changed with shock. His previously brown hair was now black, his skin was white, and with the same sadistic smile that she saw the same day he had a fight with Randy. Then she saw how Jeff was staring at her with those wide and scary eyes. Then Jane came into her house, and the parents asked her what was wrong, to which Jane responded with a shriek and passed out. When Jane woke up, it was already dark, and her parents were not home. She got out of bed in a black dress, went downstairs and saw that the kitchen light was on. There was a note on the table that said, "Are you going to come and eat dinner? Your friends are here." After reading this, Jane began to shake, and saw through the window that the lights of Jeff's house were on. Then she saw Jeff leaning against the window of her house, looking at Jane with a knife in his hand, tapping on the window and smiling. Scared, Jane took a knife and ran out of the house. She went to Jeff's house very scared. She closed her eyes and went inside. With her eyes still closed, she heard someone say, "You've made it. I'm glad, my friend." Jane screamed. She saw that Jeff's eyes were big and unblinking, and his smile was red. His clothes were covered in blood. Jane passed out again. When she woke up, she was at a dining table, her knife missing. Sitting around the table were Jeff's parents and his friends, all dead with smiles carved into their faces. She tried to scream, but she was gagged. Tears of blood were coming out of her eyes. Look who's finally awake. Jane looked to her side and saw that Jeff was there. She tried to scream, but Jeff was behind her, putting a knife to her throat and said, "Shut up, shut up. Friends shouldn't be yelled at. I'm sure you're furious because you don't look as beautiful as them, but don't worry. I'll soon make you look beautiful too." Jeff cut the gag with the knife. Jane looked in his eyes and whispered, "Fuck you." Jeff went out and Jane began to cry, thinking about her family. Jeff came back. "Don't cry," he said. Jane saw that he was holding a jug of bleach and a can of gasoline. So he poured the bleach and gasoline into her. "Don't worry, I've already called the fire department," Jeff told her. And then he lit the fire. As soon as the fire came in contact with Jane, she burst into huge flames, and Jeff stormed off saying, "See ya, my dear friend. I hope you become as beautiful as I am." When Jane woke up, she was back in the hospital and her head was pounding. Then a nurse informed her that her family had died in the fire. Then Jane started crying. Upon waking up again, she saw that she no longer had bandages, and that there were several bouquets of flowers. She had slept for 2 weeks straight. "Give me a mirror," Jane said. Seeing herself, she threw the mirror to the ground in horror. Her face was completely burned. A package arrived, and Jane was about to open it. Inside, there was a white mask with black around the hollow of the eyes, and with a smile painted in black. There was also a black wig, a bouquet of black roses, and a sharp kitchen knife. And there was a note. "Jane, I'm sorry you're not as beautiful as I am, but this will cover your face while you recover. And you left the knife at my house, so I thought I'd give it back to you." After reading it, she left the hospital, put on her wig and went to the cemetery, saw her parents' graves and cried for the last time, then put on her mask and grabbed the knife with all her might. Since that day, Jane swore revenge, and every time the sun goes down, she goes looking for Jeff to find him and kill him. Jane's motto says the opposite of Jeff's: "Don't go to sleep," in order to avoid Jeff get to do the same to more innocent victims.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more Draw My Life videos, subscribe to our channel. See you on the next episode.